I still remember the sound of the tires screeching as the Mustang pulled away. It was the sound of my son leaving my life, maybe for good. Jack was in the passenger seat, laughing, high-fiving his father, Dan. They didn't even look back. Just before they turned the corner, I saw Jack roll down the window. For a split second, I hoped he might say something to me. Instead, he just smirked and yelled, "Hope you enjoy Alyssa's car, Mom." Then, they were gone. I stood frozen. In the doorway, my heart pounding in my chest. My husband, Tom, was beside me, his fists clenched, his face red. I could hear my daughter, Alyssa, shifting uncomfortably behind us. No one spoke. What could we say? I had spent 18 years raising Jack. I had fought for custody, worked to give him everything he needed, tried my best to guide him. And yet, with just one mistake, one punishment, I had lost him completely. How did it come to this? It all started with a prank. A cruel, stupid prank. It was prom season, and Jack, my charming, popular, well-liked son, had been dared to pull what his wrestling teammates thought was the joke of the century. There was a girl, Emily, sweet, shy, heavily autistic, and, unfortunately for her, completely infatuated with Jack. His teammates raised over $800 as a reward for him to take Emily to prom as a joke. And to top it all off, he was supposed to show up in a gorilla suit. I didn't know about it. Not until the night after prom when I was mindlessly scrolling through Instagram. That's when I saw it. Jack, in a ridiculous gorilla costume, standing next to Emily, who looked like she was on the verge of tears. At first, I didn't understand. Jack had a girlfriend, Jess. Where was she? Why was he wearing that suit? But then, as I scrolled through, the comments. It all became horrifyingly clear. The whole thing had been a setup. I stormed into his room that night, screaming until my voice gave out. Tom joined in, furious as well, and things got heated fast. Jack fired back, calling Tom a guest in his house, telling him to mind his own business. When we took away his phone, he told Tom to go F himself. That was it. That was sus. The last straw. We took everything. His phone, his laptop, his graduation car. It had been a gift, fully paid for, but now, gone. We gave it to Alyssa instead. We also took the $800 and returned it to Emily's family. Jack was grounded for a month. His 18th birthday party? Canceled. I thought I was teaching him a lesson. I thought I was doing the right thing. But what I didn't see, what I completely failed to predict, was that I had just handed my ex-husband the perfect opportunity to take my son from me forever. Because the moment Jack's birthday rolled around, there was a knock at the door. And there stood Dan, smiling, smug, and holding suitcases. "Hey, kid," he said, tossing Jack a set of car keys. "I'm here for the jailbreak." I didn't know it then, but that was the last time my son would ever look at me the same way again. The house felt different the moment Jack left. At first, I tried to convince myself that he'd come back in a few days, maybe a week, that he just needed to cool off. I told myself, he's mad, he's stubborn, but he's still my son. He'll come home. But the days stretched into weeks, then a month, then 2. Jack went completely no contact with me. His phone was off. His social media wiped clean of any connection to our family. He barely even spoke to Alyssa, except for the occasional one-word text. The only updates I got were from Dan's Instagram. There, I saw my son smiling at Yankees games, eating at expensive steakhouses, and posing with a brand new watch on his wrist. "A gift from Dad," the caption read. I saw him on weekend trips to New Orleans, driving the Mustang that Dan had handed him the night he left. And then, the worst one, Jack, sitting at a high-end restaurant in New York, laughing with his girlfriend Jess. The caption, "Family dinner. Finally where he belongs." I felt sick. Tom tried to play it off at first. "He'll realize soon enough," he told me. "Dan's just spoiling him for now. When real life hits, he'll see what's what. But real life wasn't hitting. Because Dan had money, a lot of money. Jack had grown up in Texas with me, but Dan had always been a shadow in the background. A high-powered New York attorney with a six-figure income, a luxury apartment in Manhattan, and a grudge against me that never faded. I knew the second I saw those pictures. This wasn't about Jack. This was about revenge. Dan had spent years fighting me for custody. Every holiday, every summer break, every court hearing, he had pushed for more time, for more control, and every time I had fought back, protecting my custody rights and keeping Jack with me. But now, I had done his work. For him, I had taken away Jack's car, his money, his birthday. I had backed him into a corner, given Dan the perfect excuse to swoop in and play the hero. And Jack had fallen for it. Tom didn't understand why I was so upset at first. "You did what any good parent would do," he kept saying. The kid needed consequences. But then the financial strain started hitting, because in Texas, child support stops at 18. But Dan and I had divorced in New York, where it lasts until 21. And since Jack wasn't living with me anymore, Dan flipped the entire thing on me. One day, I checked my bank account, expecting my usual deposit from Dan's payments. Instead, I got a notice. Child support terminated. The next day, I got a call from my lawyer. "Dan has filed for reverse child support," she told me. "Since Jack now lives with him, you owe him." I nearly dropped the phone. Owe him? Dan made at least 3 times what I did. And now, not only was I losing the money I had been relying on, I had to start paying him? I felt like I was drowning. The mortgage was coming up. Tom was on disability and wasn't bringing in much. Alyssa was heading to college soon. And here I was, watching my son be wined and dined in New York City, while I scrambled to figure out how I was going to make next month's payment. The worst part? I knew Dan was loving every second of it, because this wasn't just about Jack. It never had been. This was about winning. Dan had played the long game. He had waited for years for his chance to take Jack from me. He had watched, patient and calculating, until I handed him the perfect excuse on a silver platter, and now, sitting in his Manhattan office, watching me lose my son, my money, and my stability, he was enjoying every second of it. And the truth was, I had no idea how to stop him. Dan wasn't just content with taking Jack. He wanted to erase me. At first, I still had some hope. Maybe with time, Jack would cool down. Maybe he'd miss home. Maybe he'd wake up and realize that Dan was just buying his love. But then, I got the cease and desist letter. It arrived in a sleek white envelope with Dan's law firm's name stamped on the front. Inside, in cold, professional language, it stated that I was to stop contacting Jack immediately. If I needed to reach him, I had to go through Dan's lawyer, his best friend, Jonathan. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the paper, my hands shaking. My own son had lawyered up against me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march up to New York, bang on their damn penthouse door, and demand to see my child. But what good would that do? Dan was a lawyer. He knew how to manipulate the system. I had seen him destroy people in court. If I tried to push my way back into Jack's life, he would make sure I regretted it. So I waited, and I hoped. And then, out of nowhere, Dan emailed me. "Jack is willing to meet with you. Manhattan Cafe, 2 p.m. Don't be late." I had no idea what changed, but I didn't care. I jumped at the chance. Dan booked me a flight, a 6 a.m. flight. He even covered the hotel. At first, I thought, maybe he's softening up. Maybe he wants to fix things. But when I arrived, the hotel was in one of the worst neighborhoods I'd ever seen. The walls were stained, the carpet smelled like mildew, and the front desk clerk looked at me like I was insane when I checked in. I didn't sleep that night. I could hear shouting. Outside my window, sirens wailing in the distance. By the time I arrived at the cafe the next day, I was exhausted. And that's when I realized this was a setup. Dan was already there, sitting at a corner table, grinning like the cat that ate the canary. Next to him was Jonathan, the lawyer, and Jack's girlfriend, Jess. And then there was Jack. He looked good, healthier than I had seen him in months. He was wearing a new watch, new shoes. He looked like he belonged in this upscale New York cafe. But when he turned to me, there was no warmth, no love, just cold, detached indifference. I sat down slowly, unsure of how to start. How do you talk to your own child when he looks at you like a stranger? Then Jonathan, the lawyer, cleared his throat and placed a folder on the table. Jack has a claim against you for theft, he said matter-of-factly. I blinked. What? The $840. You took it from him. That money was his, not yours. Under the law, that constitutes theft. Jack is willing to drop the claim if you return it today. I turned to Jack, waiting for him to say something, anything. To tell me this wasn't what he wanted. But all he did was lean back in his chair, arms crossed. You locked me in my room like a prisoner for a month, he said, voice cold. Took my car, took my money, humiliated me. I told you you'd never get another chance to control me again. I felt my stomach turn. Jack, that money. Your friends paid you to humiliate that girl. I wasn't going to let you keep it. Jack shrugged. That wasn't your call to make. I turned to Dan, desperate. Are you seriously letting him do this? Dan just smirked and took a sip of his coffee. This is between you and Jack. I looked back at my son, my baby, the boy I had raised, loved, sacrificed for. And now he was sitting across from me with a lawyer at his side, treating me like I was just another person to be negotiated with. I should have just paid the money. I should have swallowed my pride, wired the $840, and walked away with at least a chance of rebuilding something. But I couldn't. I was too angry, too humiliated, too disgusted by the entire setup. I refused. Jonathan nodded, closed the folder, and pushed a second envelope toward me. A formal cease and desist. I was no longer allowed to contact Jack. If I did, I could be taken to court. I looked at my son one last time, searching for something, remorse, regret, a flicker of doubt, but he just looked at me and said, You made your choice, Mom. Now I'm making mine. Then he stood up and walked away. Dan followed, but not before leaning down close to me and whispering in my ear, You lost, sweetheart. Checkmate. I don't remember how I got back to the hotel. I must have walked, or maybe I took a cab. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered. I sat on the edge of the stiff hotel bed, staring at the cease and desist letter in my hands. Jack was gone. Not just physically, not just living in another state. He had erased me from his life, and the worst part? I had helped him do it. I should have just given him the damn money. I should have swallowed my anger, handed over the $840s, and taken whatever scrap of a relationship I could still salvage. But I hadn't. Because in that moment, sitting at that cafe, staring at my smug ex-husband and my son, who now belonged to him, I had been too angry, too proud, too humiliated. I had chosen my indignation over my son, just like Dan said I would. I don't know how long I sat there, replaying every decision I had made over the last year. The punishment, the car, the grounding, the way I had backed Jack into a corner. I had pushed him straight into Dan's arms, and Dan had been waiting. I had spent years fighting to keep Jack with me, and in the end, I had handed him over without a single court battle. I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I just sat there, gripping the letter, feeling the world close in around me. Then my phone rang. It was my lawyer. Dan finalized the child support claim, she said. You owe him $2,500 a month. I felt my stomach drop. That can't be right. He makes more than me. He doesn't need the money. He doesn't, she agreed. But the court still approved it. And since you've already missed your first payment, you're technically in arrears. Arrears. Debt. I couldn't breathe. What happens if I can't pay? Your wages will be garnished, she said. If you fall too far behind, there could be legal consequences. Legal consequences. I hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling. Not only had I lost my son, I was about to lose everything else too. The mortgage was already late. Tom's disability check barely covered the basics. I had been relying on Dan's child support payments for years, and now, not only was that gone, I was the one paying him. Dan hadn't just won. He had buried me. I called Alyssa. She picked up on the second ring. "Mom?" she asked, hesitant. "Are you okay?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell her everything was fine. But my voice broke as I whispered, "I don't know what to do." There was silence on the other end. Then, in a small voice, she said, "Are you going to lose the house?" I closed my eyes. "I put it on the market this morning." More silence. Then a sniffle. "I miss Jack," she said softly. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Me too, baby." I heard her take a deep breath. Do you think he'll ever come back?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her that one day, Jack would wake up and realize what he had done, that he would remember who had raised him, who had fought for him, that he would miss me, but I couldn't, because deep down I knew the truth. Jack wasn't coming back. Dan had made sure of that, and I had let him. It's been almost a year since that day in New York. Jack is engaged now. I saw it on Instagram. Jess posted a picture of her ring with Jack's arm around her waist. They looked happy. I wasn't invited to the wedding. I doubt I ever will. The house sold last month. I moved into a small apartment, just me and Tom. Alyssa is away at college, but she still calls me every week. She's the only thing keeping me sane. Jack still won't talk to me. I've emailed him, sent messages through Alyssa, even tried reaching out to Dan. Nothing. And the worst part? I don't blame him anymore. I thought I was teaching him a lesson. I thought I was disciplining him. But I went too far. I let my anger win. And now, I would give anything, just to hear my son's voice again. But it's too late. Some mistakes you can't undo. Some losses are forever. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.